The chapel bells tolled as Lady Clara Marin became Lady Clara Veilhart, Duchess of Thornfield. Each resonant peal seemed to echo the hollowness within her breast, where once a beating heart had resided. Now only duty remained, a pale substitute for the passion she had long surrendered hopes of experiencing. The ceremony proceeded with mechanical precision, like clockwork gears turning without purpose, save the marking of time's inexorable passage. Her father, the Conde de Marin, observed from the front pew with calculating eyes that gleamed with triumph, not paternal affection. His gambling debts would be settled by this union, his daughter's soul a mere bargaining token in gentlemen's transactions. "With this ring I thee wed," intoned the Duke of Thornfield, his voice resonant yet devoid of warmth. His countenance, so perfectly sculpted it might have been chiseled from marble, betrayed no emotion as he slipped the golden band upon her trembling finger. Lady Clara's response was scarcely audible, a whisper of acquiescence that belied the tempest of resignation churning within. The assembled aristocracy watched with approving nods, a proper match, they thought, between a man of impeccable lineage and a woman of suitable breeding, if diminished fortune. "May the Lord bless this sacred union," pronounced the bishop with sonorous finality. Yet when their hands touched during the exchange of vows, Clara sensed not divinity but cold stone, the joining of two strangers bound by parchment and propriety, not by providence. The wedding breakfast proceeded with elegant restraint at Thornfield House, the Duke's ancestral seat. Crystal caught the weak winter light, casting prisms across damask tablecloths and polished silver. Toasts were offered. Champagne flutes clinked with delicate precision. Through it all, Clara smiled with practiced serenity, a porcelain facade concealing the cracks spreading through her spirit. "Your Grace," she said, when they found a moment alone in the Grand Library, her eyes fixed upon the leather-bound volumes rather than her new husband's face, "I shall endeavor to be a wife worthy of your name and station." The Duke regarded her with distant civility. "I expect nothing less and nothing more. Ours shall be a union of mutual respect and appropriate distance." Relief and despair mingled in her breast at his pronouncement, the former because she feared his touch, the latter because she mourned the death of hope before it had drawn breath. "Very well," she replied, her voice steady despite the trembling within. "I understand your wishes perfectly." That evening, the Duchess retired to her chambers while maids unpacked her modest trousseau. The room was elegantly appointed yet sterile, like a beautiful mausoleum. When her lady's maid finished brushing her hair, 100 strokes as tradition dictated, Clara dismissed her with gentle finality. Alone, she approached the window, where moonlight spilled across the parquet floor. Beyond the glass lay the vast Thornfield gardens, sculpted hedgerows and stone pathways stretching toward distant woods, a kingdom of order and restraint. She pressed her fingertips to the cold glass and closed her eyes. A prayer formed in her mind, but remained unspoken. She had long ago lost faith in heaven's attention to earthly sorrows. The knock, when it came, startled her from reverie. 3 precise taps, neither demanding nor hesitant. "Enter," she said, drawing herself upright, composing her features into the mask of serene submission expected of a duchess on her wedding night. The door opened, and her husband stood upon the threshold, clad in a midnight blue dressing gown. His expression revealed nothing of his intentions or expectations. "Madam," he said with formal correctness, "I trust you find your accommodations satisfactory." "Indeed, Your Grace, they are most commodious." He nodded once, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. The lock engaged with a soft, definitive click. Clara's breath caught in her throat, not from anticipation but from the resigned acceptance of what must follow. She had been raised to understand her wifely obligations. Duty, always duty, the cornerstone of noble existence. The Duke approached, each measured step closing the distance between their bodies, while the gulf between their souls remained vast as oceans. "Before we proceed with what convention demands," he said, his voice low and measured, "I believe we should establish understanding between us." She lifted her gaze to his, surprised to find not lust, but something akin to weariness in his grey eyes. "Understanding, Your Grace?" "Indeed." He moved to the window where she had stood moments before. "This marriage was arranged for practical purposes. I required a wife of suitable lineage. Your father required financial salvation. These facts need not be obscured between us." Clara nodded, unable to speak past the constriction in her throat. "What passes between us this night and hereafter shall be conducted with dignity and respect," he continued. "I do not expect passion where none exists, nor shall I demand displays of affection for public consumption beyond what propriety requires." The Duke turned, moonlight silvering his severe profile. "Have I made myself clear, madam?" "Perfectly clear, Your Grace." "Very well." He approached her once more, his expression inscrutable. "Shall we proceed with what custom dictates?" Clara lowered her eyes and nodded, her hands clasped before her to disguise their trembling. The candle on her nightstand guttered in a sudden draught, its flame wavering between light and darkness, just as her soul teetered between resignation and despair. Morning arrived with austere brilliance, winter sunlight streaming through frost-etched window panes. Clara awakened alone, the empty space beside her bearing only the faintest impression to suggest her husband had been present at all. The night had passed as he had promised, with dignity and distance, their bodies performing what duty demanded, while their spirits remained locked in separate chambers. She rose and rang for her lady's maid, assuming the mantle of Duchess with each precise motion. Breakfast would be served at 8. Household accounts would require review at 10. Calls from neighboring estates might be expected by afternoon. Thus would her days proceed henceforth, measured in obligations rather than joys. When she descended the grand staircase, the Duke awaited her in the morning room, a newspaper held before him like a shield. He acknowledged her entrance with a slight inclination of his head. "Good morning, Your Grace," she offered, taking the chair opposite him at the breakfast table. "Indeed, I trust you slept well." His inquiry was posed with perfect politeness, devoid of genuine curiosity. "Quite well, thank you." Silence descended between them, broken only by the delicate clink of silver against porcelain. Clara buttered a piece of toast with methodical precision, though her appetite had abandoned her entirely. "I shall be occupied with estate business until dinner," he informed her, folding his newspaper with crisp movements. "You may wish to familiarize yourself with the household in my absence. Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper, will assist you in understanding your duties as mistress of Thornfield. Of course I shall attend to it immediately." The Duke nodded, satisfied with her compliance. "Very good." He rose from the table, towering above her like a sentinel. "Until dinner, then." Left alone, Clara released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The weight of silence pressed upon her with greater force than any sound. She finished her tea, composed herself, and set about the business of becoming Duchess of Thornfield in more than name. The morning passed in a blur of introductions and inspections. Mrs. Winters, a stern-faced woman with eyes that missed nothing, guided her through the labyrinthine corridors of what was now her home, introducing her to an army of servants whose names blurred together in Clara's overwhelmed mind. "The East Wing hasn't been opened since the old Duchess passed," Mrs. Winters informed her as they traversed a particularly long gallery lined with ancestral portraits. "His Grace prefers not to disturb his mother's rooms." Clara nodded, noting how the housekeeper spoke of the previous Duchess with reverential tones. "I shall respect His Grace's wishes, naturally. The music room is through here," Mrs. Winters continued, opening a door that revealed a chamber bathed in dusty golden light. Clara stepped inside, her breath catching at the sight of a magnificent grand piano positioned beneath a tall window. Unbidden, her fingers twitched with memory and longing. "Do you play, Your Grace?" the housekeeper inquired, noting her reaction. "I did once," Clara replied softly, "many years ago. The old Duchess was quite accomplished. His Grace has kept the instrument tuned, though I cannot recall the last time anyone touched it." Clara approached the piano, drawn by some invisible thread of connection. She raised the fallboard with gentle hands, revealing ivory keys that gleamed with silent invitation. Without conscious thought, her fingers settled upon them, drawing forth a single perfect chord that resonated through the empty room. "I shall leave you to acquaint yourself further," Mrs. Winters said, withdrawing with a respectful curtsy. Alone in the music room, Clara allowed her fingers to whisper across the keys, coaxing forth fragments of melody she had composed in secret during her girlhood. The notes hung in the air like prayers, unspoken, yet deeply felt. She did not hear the door open, did not sense another presence until a floorboard creaked behind her. Her hands stilled instantly as she turned to find her husband standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Your Grace," she said, rising quickly from the bench. "Forgive me, I did not expect—" "You play with considerable skill," he observed, stepping into the room. "I was not aware of your accomplishment." Clara lowered her gaze. "It has been some time since I practiced with any regularity. What was that piece? I do not recognize it." A flush warmed her cheeks. "It is nothing of consequence, merely something I composed as a girl." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. "You compose as well as perform?" "I would not dignify my efforts with such a term," she demurred. "They are merely scribblings, emotional indulgences." The Duke approached the piano, examining the polished surface as though it might reveal secrets. "My mother played daily. This room was her sanctuary." His voice held an unfamiliar note, softer, less certain. Mrs. Winters mentioned as much. I shall not intrude upon your memories if you prefer the instrument remain untouched. He considered her words, his fingers trailing across the piano's edge. No, he said finally. It was made to be played, not preserved as a relic. You may use it whenever you wish. Clara inclined her head, surprised by this unexpected concession. Thank you, Your Grace. An awkward silence stretched between them before he spoke again. I must return to my affairs. Dinner is served at 7. With that, he departed, leaving Clara alone once more with the piano and the lingering resonance of notes that had momentarily bridged the chasm between them. Later that afternoon, while exploring the library, Clara discovered a leather portfolio, tucked between volumes of poetry. Inside lay sheets of music, notated in a delicate feminine hand. At the top of the first page, a title was inscribed, Hymn for the Forgotten. The Duchess traced the faded ink with trembling fingers, feeling as though she had uncovered something deeply personal, a voice silenced by time, yet preserved in musical notation. She was so absorbed that she failed to notice the approaching footsteps until a shadow fell across the pages. I see you have found my mother's compositions, said the Duke, his voice startling her from reverie. Clara hastily closed the portfolio. Forgive me. I did not mean to pry into private matters. There is nothing to forgive. He extended his hand, and she passed him the leather case. He opened it with careful reverence, his eyes scanning the notations. She worked on this piece during her final illness. It remained unfinished at her passing. Something in his tone, a subtle catch, barely perceptible, hinted at depths of feeling carefully concealed beneath his stoic exterior. It is titled, Hymn for the Forgotten, Clara observed softly. Indeed. The Duke closed the portfolio, his expression once again impenetrable. My mother believed music spoke truths that words could not express. Before Clara could respond, the library door opened to admit the butler. Pardon the interruption, Your Grace, but a messenger has arrived from London with urgent correspondence. The Duke nodded. Very well, I shall attend to it immediately. As he moved to depart, he hesitated, then placed the portfolio in Clara's hands. Perhaps you might consider completing it someday. It seems a pity to leave a voice half expressed. With that cryptic statement, he followed the butler from the room, leaving Clara clutching the unfinished hymn against her breast like a fragile bird. She opened it once more, studying the notations with newfound understanding. The title page fluttered slightly, revealing what appeared to be an alternate title crossed out beneath the one she had read, Hymn for the Unheard. A fortnight passed in the measured rhythm of aristocratic life. Clara adapted to her role as Duchess with outward grace, overseeing household matters with quiet efficiency, yet beneath the surface of propriety, currents of unspoken feeling gathered strength. The Duke maintained his promised distance, their interactions limited to brief exchanges at mealtimes and occasional encounters in the library or corridors. Each night, he would appear at her chamber door with clockwork predictability. Their marital duties were performed with detached courtesy, bodies joined while souls remained resolutely separate. Each morning, she would awaken alone, as though his presence had been merely a dream, or perhaps a visitation, ghost-like in its transience. On this particular morning, however, the established pattern altered. Clara descended for breakfast to find not her husband, but his mother's portrait awaiting her in the morning room. It had been moved from the gallery overnight, and now occupied the space above the mantelpiece, the former Duchess's serene countenance gazing down upon the breakfast table with enigmatic benevolence. His Grace ordered it placed here at first light, explained the butler when Clara inquired. He departed for the tenant farms before dawn and indicated he would not return until evening. Clara studied the portrait with renewed interest. Lady Catherine Veilhart had possessed beauty of a refined, ethereal quality. Dark hair swept elegantly upward, revealing a slender neck and delicate collarbones, but it was her eyes that commanded attention, piercing yet gentle, knowing yet compassionate. She appears to have been a remarkable woman, Clara observed. Indeed, Your Grace, the most gentle of souls, yet possessed of uncommon strength. The butler's voice softened with evident fondness. She transformed this house from a mausoleum into a home. Clara's gaze remained fixed upon the painted eyes that seemed to look through her rather than at her. How long has she been gone? These 10 years past, Your Grace. His Grace has never fully recovered from the loss, though he would permit no one to speak of it. This revelation illuminated something of her husband's remote demeanor, grief calcified into habit over a decade of solitude. Clara felt a flutter of compassion stir within her breast, quickly suppressed by the reminder that understanding was not the same as intimacy. After breakfast, drawn by some inexplicable impulse, Clara returned to the music room. The Duke's mother's portfolio lay upon the piano where she had left it days earlier. She opened it with reverent care and began to play the unfinished hymn, allowing the notes to guide her fingers across the keys. The melody was haunting, minor chords resolving unexpectedly into moments of transcendent beauty before descending once more into melancholy depths. It ended abruptly mid-phrase, as though the composer had been interrupted mid-thought, or perhaps as though she had reached the limits of what mortal hands could express. Clara sat in silence when the final notated chord faded. Then, hesitantly, her fingers found the keys once more, continuing the interrupted phrase with her own musical intuition. Notes formed beneath her touch, not an imitation of Lady Catherine's style, but a response to it, a conversation across time and silence. She did not consciously compose, merely allowed her soul to speak through her fingers. Tears blurred her vision as the music flowed from some wellspring of emotion she had long denied existed within her. When at last she lifted her hands from the keys, she was startled to discover that twilight had descended, casting the room in violet shadows. More startling still was the realization that she was not alone. The Duke stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the dimly lit corridor beyond. How long he had been there, listening, Clara could not guess. His expression, half concealed in shadow, revealed nothing of his thoughts. "Your Grace," she said, rising hastily from the bench, "I did not hear you return." "Evidently," he replied, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. He entered the room fully, approaching the piano with measured steps. "You have continued my mother's composition." It was not a question, yet Clara felt compelled to answer. "I meant no disrespect. The music, it seemed to ask for completion." He nodded slowly, his gaze falling upon the open portfolio. "And what does it say now? This hymn for the forgotten, or is it for the unheard?" Clara's breath caught at his reference to the crossed-out title. "Perhaps both," she ventured. "To be forgotten and to be unheard are kindred sorrows." Something flickered in his eyes, a recognition quickly veiled. "Play it," he said softly. "Play it in its entirety." It was the first direct request he had made of her that extended beyond duty. Clara hesitated only a moment before seating herself once more at the piano. Her fingers trembled slightly as they settled upon the keys, but when she began to play, all uncertainty vanished. The music filled the darkening room, Lady Catherine's composition flowing seamlessly into Clara's continuation. The melody spoke of longing and loss, of silenced voices and unspoken truths. As the final notes resolved into unexpected harmony, Clara felt rather than saw her husband move closer. "You understand," he said, his voice barely audible above the lingering resonance of the final chord. "Understand what, Your Grace?" The language of the unspoken. He reached past her to close the portfolio with gentle finality. "My mother would have approved of your completion." Clara looked up at him, momentarily emboldened by the intimacy of shared music. "Did you love her very much?" The question was unconscionably direct, yet he did not rebuke her for it. Instead, he answered with simple truth. "She was the only person who ever truly saw me." In those words, Clara glimpsed the vast loneliness that lay beneath his formal exterior, a desolation that mirrored her own. For an instant, their gazes held, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of mutual wounds carried in silence. The moment shattered when a servant appeared at the door announcing that dinner awaited. The Duke withdrew immediately, his customary reserve descending like a curtain. Throughout dinner, they maintained their usual polite distance, as though the moment of connection in the music room had never occurred. Yet Clara sensed a subtle shift in the atmosphere between them, like the almost imperceptible change in barometric pressure that precedes a storm. When she retired that evening, she found upon her dressing table a small velvet box. Inside lay a delicate silver key of antique design. No note accompanied it, but its significance was clear when she discovered it fit the lock of Lady Catherine's music room, a room she now realized had been kept locked until her arrival at Thornfield. As Clara prepared for bed, wondering at this unexpected gesture, a knock sounded at her door. 3 precise taps, neither demanding nor hesitant. Yet when she bid him enter, the Duke remained upon the threshold, making no move to approach her bed, as was their established custom. "I shall not disturb your rest tonight," he said, his voice carefully neutral. Before she could respond, he continued, "The piece you played this evening, would you consider notating your contribution? It deserves to exist beyond the moment of its creation." The request held meaning beyond its surface, an acknowledgement that her voice deserved to be heard, preserved, remembered. "If it would please you, Your Grace," she replied softly. "It is not a matter of pleasing me," he corrected her, his tone gentle despite the rebuke. "It is a matter of completing what was interrupted, of giving voice to the unheard." With that enigmatic statement, he bowed slightly and withdrew, closing the door with quiet finality. Clara stood motionless in the center of her chamber, the silver key clutched in her palm until its edges impressed themselves upon her flesh. Outside her window, the first snow of winter began to fall, each flake descending in perfect solitary silence, yet together creating a blanket that transformed the world beneath. The following morning, snowfall transformed Thornfield into a kingdom of crystalline silence. Clara stood at her window, watching servants clear pathways through drifts that glittered like scattered diamonds. The estate appeared reborn beneath winter's blanket, harsh edges softened, imperfections concealed beneath pristine white. She dressed with care, selecting a gown of dove grey that complemented her eyes. Since arriving at Thornfield, she had worn only subdued colours, as though subconsciously attempting to fade into the background of her husband's life. Today, however, she added a silver brooch, a small assertion of selfhood amid the obligations of her position. The Duke was absent from breakfast once more, having departed before dawn for business in the neighbouring village. Clara found herself oddly disappointed by his absence, though she quickly dismissed such feelings as foolish sentimentality born of their brief musical connection. After attending to household correspondence, she made her way to the music room, drawn by the silver key that now hung from a slender chain about her neck. The room awaited her like a confidant, sunlight streaming through tall windows to pool upon the polished floor. Clara seated herself at the piano and began the meticulous process of transcribing the continuation she had composed for Lady Catherine's unfinished hymn. Notes flowed from memory through her fingers and onto the page, a translation from ephemeral sound to permanent record. "You have a remarkable gift," said a voice from the doorway. Clara turned, startled to find not her husband but an elderly woman observing her with keen interest. The visitor's silver hair was arranged in an elegant coiffure, her black silk gown suggesting both wealth and mourning. "Forgive me," the woman continued, advancing into the room with the aid of an ebony walking stick. "I did not mean to intrude upon your solitude. I am Lady Thornfield, the Dowager Duchess and Gabriel's mother-in-law from his first marriage." Clara rose immediately, curtsying with respect. "Your Grace, I am honored to make your acquaintance." The Dowager Duchess smiled, her expression warming her austere features. "Please, my dear, we need not stand on such ceremony when alone. I have come to welcome you to Thornfield and to satisfy my curiosity about the woman my nephew has chosen." "Nephew?" Clara echoed, confusion evident in her tone. "Did he not explain? Gabriel became Duke of Thornfield through his marriage to my daughter Eleanor. When she died without issue, the title remained with him, rather than reverting to a distant male cousin." The dowager's eyes clouded momentarily with old grief. "I have remained at the Dower House these past 7 years, watching him retreat further into isolation with each passing season." This revelation illuminated another facet of her husband's character, the weight of obligation he carried, a title preserved through loss rather than blood right. "Please, sit," Clara offered, gesturing to a nearby settee. "I would be grateful for your company." The dowager accepted, arranging her skirts with practiced elegance. "I understand you have discovered Catherine's music. Gabriel's mother was my dearest friend from girlhood. Her death broke something in her son that Eleanor's love began to mend, until fate took her as well." Clara's fingers unconsciously touched the key at her throat. "I have been working to complete Lady Catherine's final composition." "Have you indeed?" The dowager's gaze sharpened with interest. "And does Gabriel know of this endeavour?" "It was at his suggestion that I undertake it." This answer seemed to please the older woman greatly. "Then perhaps there is hope after all. Gabriel has guarded his mother's music as jealously as a dragon its treasure. That he would entrust it to you speaks volumes about what he sees in you, whether he acknowledges it or not." Clara felt a flush warming her cheeks. "I fear you misinterpret his gesture, Your Grace. Our marriage is one of convenience, not affection." The dowager's lips curved in a knowing smile. "My dear, I have observed Gabriel Valhart since he was a solemn child of 7. He does nothing without purpose, grants nothing without reason. If he has given you access to Catherine's music, it is because he recognizes something in your soul that resonates with his own." Before Clara could formulate a response to this startling assessment, a commotion erupted in the entrance hall. Raised voices penetrated even the solid oak door of the music room, one in particular striking Clara with the force of a physical blow. "I demand to see my daughter immediately," bellowed the unmistakable voice of the Conde de Marennes. Clara rose instinctively, her body tensing as though bracing for impact. The Dowager Duchess observed her reaction with shrewd understanding. "Your father, I presume?" she inquired, her tone deceptively mild. "Yes," Clara whispered, her composure crumbling beneath the weight of memories his voice evoked. Sharp words, disappointed glares, the constant reminder that she had failed to be the son he desired. "Then we shall meet him together," declared the dowager, rising with surprising vigor for one of her years. "No one terrorizes a Thornfield bride while I draw breath." Clara had no opportunity to protest this declaration before the music room door burst open to admit her father. The Conde had aged noticeably in the month since she had last seen him, his once handsome features now ravaged by dissipation and anger. His traveling clothes bore evidence of haste and carelessness, his eyes bloodshot from drink or sleeplessness, perhaps both. "There you are," he spat, glaring at Clara with undisguised contempt. "Playing at being Duchess, while your family faces ruin." Clara's throat constricted, familiar shame flooding her veins like poison. "Father, may I present Lady Thornfield, the Dowager Duchess?" "I care nothing for introductions," he interrupted, advancing into the room with predatory intent. "I have come about the quarterly allowance your husband promised as part of your marriage settlement. It has not been paid." The Dowager Duchess drew herself up to her full height, her walking stick planted firmly upon the floor like a scepter. "Sir, you forget yourself. This is not some common tavern where you may bellow demands. You address a duchess in her own home." The Conde barely spared her a contemptuous glance. "This matter does not concern you, madam. It is between me and my daughter." "Everything that occurs within these walls concerns me," the dowager retorted, her voice gaining an edge of steel. "And you would do well to remember that your daughter is now Duchess of Thornfield, not your personal property to browbeat at will." Clara felt something unfamiliar stirring within her breast, not fear, which had been her constant companion in her father's presence since childhood, but a strange, fragile dignity born of the dowager's fierce defense. "Father," she said, her voice soft yet steady, "if there has been some irregularity regarding the settlement, I am certain His Grace will address it upon his return. However, I must ask that you compose yourself and observe the proprieties due to this house and its mistress." The Conde's face darkened with rage. "You dare to lecture me on propriety? You who have failed in every filial duty? Your mother would be ashamed to see what you have become, a cold, ungrateful creature who abandons her family at the first opportunity." Each word struck like a physical blow, yet Clara remained standing, her fingers curled into her palms until nails bit flesh. "That is untrue," she whispered. "I have never abandoned my duty, even when it required sacrificing my own happiness." "Happiness?" he scoffed. "What right have you to happiness when your family suffers? Your brother requires funds to secure his commission. Your sister's dowry must be increased if she is to make a suitable match. Yet you live in luxury while we face ruin." The brother who had tormented her throughout childhood, the sister who had delighted in spreading malicious gossip that damaged Clara's reputation in society. Neither had ever shown her kindness, yet their welfare remained her responsibility, according to her father's twisted logic. Before Clara could respond, the music room door opened once more to reveal the Duke himself, his expression thunderous as he surveyed the scene before him. "What?" he inquired with deadly softness. "Is the meaning of this intrusion?" The Conde turned, momentarily startled by the Duke's arrival, before recovering his belligerence. "I have come about the quarterly payment you promised. It has not been received." "Indeed?" The Duke's voice remained dangerously calm as he closed the door behind him with deliberate precision. "How curious, given that I dispatched it to your solicitor not 3 days past, along with explicit instructions that it was to be the final payment you would ever receive from this household." The room fell silent, the Conde's face paling beneath its ruddy hue. "Final payment? What trickery is this? The agreement specified quarterly payments for the duration of 1 year," the Duke interrupted. "I have, out of respect for my wife's position, chosen to fulfill that obligation in a single lump sum, thus severing all financial connections between Thornfield and your household permanently." The Conde's expression contorted with rage and desperation. "You cannot do this. My daughter has obligations to her family that supersede even her marital vows." "On the contrary," replied the Duke, advancing into the room with measured steps. "Upon becoming my wife, Lady Clara's primary obligation transferred to me and to this household. I will not have her peace disturbed by your endless demands." He turned to Clara, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. "Are you well, madam?" The simple inquiry, devoid of his usual formality, unleashed something within Clara's breast, a flutter of unexpected warmth. "Yes, your Grace. The Dowager Duchess has been most kind." The Duke acknowledged his aunt with a respectful nod, before returning his attention to the Conde. "Sir, your carriage awaits. I suggest you make use of it before I am forced to have you removed bodily from these premises." "This is not the end of this matter," the Conde hissed, backing toward the door, his gaze fixed upon Clara with malevolent promise. "Remember who you are and where you come from, daughter. You cannot escape your blood or your obligations, no matter how grand your new title." When he had gone, silence descended upon the music room, broken only by the crackling of the fire in the grate. The Dowager Duchess was the first to speak. "Well," she said briskly, "I believe tea is in order after such unpleasantness. Shall we adjourn to the drawing-room?" Clara could only nod, her composure maintained by the thinnest thread of will. As they moved toward the door, the Duke's hand lightly touched her elbow. A fleeting contact, yet it steadied her more effectively than any words of comfort could have done. "You need never see him again," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "I give you my word." In that moment, something shifted between them. A key turning in a lock long thought rusted shut. January deepened, enfolding Thornfield in ever more elaborate manifestations of winter's artistry. Frost etched delicate patterns across window panes, icicles hung like crystal daggers from eaves, snow piled in sculptural drifts against ancient stone walls. Inside, fires blazed in grand hearths, casting flickering light across polished floors and burnished wood. Clara found herself settling into an unexpected rhythm within her marriage. The Duke no longer visited her chamber at night, their brief physical connection apparently deemed sufficient for propriety's sake. Instead, they established a different, more meaningful communion. Hours spent in the library or music room, often in silence, yet a silence that gradually transformed from awkward to companionable. She continued working on the completion of Lady Catherine's hymn, sometimes aware of her husband's presence as he stood by the window, listening with an intensity that suggested he heard far more than mere notes. On rare occasions, he would offer a suggestion, perhaps a minor seventh there, or the phrase might resolve more naturally if, revealing a musical knowledge that surprised and intrigued her. The Dowager Duchess became a regular visitor, bringing warmth and wisdom to the great house. From her, Clara learned the history of Thornfield and its inhabitants, stories of Lady Catherine's kindness and intelligence, of the Duke's childhood solemnity and unexpected flashes of humour, of his first wife's gentle spirit and untimely death. "Eleanor was consumptive from childhood," the Dowager confided during one afternoon visit. "We all knew her time with us would be brief. Gabriel married her, knowing he would become her nurse as much as her husband. He never complained, never faltered in his devotion, even when the illness rendered her unrecognizable at the end." This revelation illuminated another facet of the Duke's character, his capacity for steadfast loyalty, for bearing burdens without complaint. Clara found herself viewing him with growing admiration, seeing strength rather than coldness in his reserve. On this particular evening, Clara sat in the library, attempting to lose herself in a volume of poetry. The Duke had departed that morning for London on urgent business, leaving the great house feeling strangely empty, despite its many servants and vast dimensions. She had grown accustomed to his presence, she realized, the sound of his footsteps in the corridor, the rustle of pages turning as he read in his chair by the fire, the occasional glance that met hers across a room with increasing warmth. A discreet knock interrupted her reverie. "Enter," she called, expecting Mrs. Winters with some household matter requiring attention. Instead, the butler appeared, bearing a silver salver upon which rested a letter sealed with unfamiliar wax. "This arrived by special messenger, Your Grace." Clara accepted the missive with a murmured thanks. The handwriting was unknown to her, the seal bearing no recognizable crest. Breaking it open, she unfolded the single sheet within and began to read. With each word, her blood ran colder, her fingers clutching the paper until it crumpled beneath her grasp. The letter contained no signature, yet its message was devastatingly clear. Detailed allegations regarding her father's disreputable activities, including gambling debts, associations with known criminals, and most damning of all, fraudulent manipulation of the marriage settlement between herself and the Duke. "Your husband is not the first nobleman to purchase you," the letter concluded with vicious clarity. "Ask him what truly became of his first wife's fortune and why he required yours to replace it." Clara sat motionless, the letter trembling in her grasp as she struggled to make sense of its implications. Was this merely malicious gossip designed to create discord in her marriage? Or could there be truth hidden within the venomous words? She recalled her father's unexpected appearance, his rage at learning the settlement had been paid in full. Had there been something more behind his anger than simple greed? And the Duke's insistence on severing all financial ties with her family, had that been protective of her or self-serving? The questions multiplied like shadows at dusk, each one darker than the last. Clara returned the letter to its envelope with hands that had grown steadier with resolution. She would not allow anonymous poison to undermine the fragile trust. growing between herself and her husband. When he returned from London, she would show him the letter and observe his reaction with clear eyes. Having reached this decision, she moved to place the envelope in her writing desk, only to discover a second letter had arrived during her daily activities and been placed there by a well-meaning maid. This one bore her father's unmistakable seal. With considerable trepidation, she opened it, finding within a document of legal terminology that, upon careful reading, revealed itself to be a draft of the original marriage settlement between herself and the Duke. Certain passages were underlined in her father's aggressive hand, with annotations suggesting the Duke had altered terms after signing but before execution of the agreement. If true, it would constitute fraud, a crime that could ruin her husband's reputation and possibly lead to criminal charges. Yet why would her father provide evidence that implicated himself as well? The answer came in a brief note accompanying the document. Destroy the original agreement in your husband's possession, replace it with this amended version, and the quarterly payments will continue as promised. Refuse, and I shall be forced to reveal the Duke's perfidy to the authorities, bringing scandal upon us all. Blackmail. Her father was attempting to blackmail her into betraying her husband. Clara's breath came in shallow gasps as the full implications clarified in her mind. This was the true reason behind his unexpected visit. His rage at learning the settlement had been paid in full. Without the leverage of ongoing payments, he had resorted to this desperate gambit. But was there truth to his allegations? Had the Duke indeed altered their marriage settlement fraudulently, and if so, for what purpose? Clara carefully refolded both letters and secured them in a hidden compartment of her writing desk. The peaceful rhythm of her days at Thornfield now seemed a naive illusion, shattered by these twin revelations. Trust, so tentatively established between herself and her husband, hung by a thread that these accusations threatened to sever. The library door opened without warning, startling Clara from her troubled reverie. The Duke himself stood upon the threshold, his tall frame silhouetted against the corridor beyond. "Your Grace," she gasped, rising quickly from her seat. "I did not expect your return until tomorrow at earliest. My business concluded more expeditiously than anticipated," he replied, studying her with unexpected intensity. "You are disturbed. Has something occurred during my absence?" His perceptiveness was unsettling. Had her composure grown so transparent to his gaze? Clara hesitated, torn between immediate confrontation and more cautious observation. "Nothing of significance," she prevaricated, her gaze falling to avoid his searching eyes. "Merely household matters that Mrs. Winters and I have well in hand." The Duke advanced into the room, closing the distance between them with measured steps. "You dissemble, madam." "Poorly, if I may say so." Clara lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with newfound determination. "As do you, sir, on occasion. We all have our secrets, do we not?" Something flickered across his features, surprise, perhaps, at her uncharacteristic directness. He removed his gloves with deliberate precision, considering her words before responding. "Indeed," he acknowledged finally, "though I had hoped we might progress beyond such necessity, given recent developments between us." The statement hung in the air, an oblique reference to the subtle warming of their relations, the gradual dissolution of barriers erected at their marriage's commencement. "As had I," Clara admitted softly. "Yet I find myself confronted with questions I had not thought to ask." "Then ask them," he invited, his voice low and steady. "I would have honesty between us, if nothing else." Clara drew a deep breath, her decision made. "Very well. What truly became of your first wife's fortune, and why did you require mine to replace it?" The color drained from the Duke's face, leaving him ashen in the firelight. His hands, usually so steady, clenched convulsively at his sides. "Who," he asked with deadly quietude, "has been poisoning your mind with such questions?" Clara retrieved the anonymous letter from her desk, extending it toward him without comment. He accepted it, scanning its contents with rapid intensity. When he looked up, his expression had hardened into something she had never before witnessed, a cold fury that transformed his handsome features into a mask of barely contained rage. "I see," he said, his voice controlled to the point of brittleness. "And you believed these allegations sufficient to doubt my character and intentions?" "I did not say I believed them," Clara countered, maintaining her composure despite the thunderous atmosphere developing between them. "I merely asked the question they raised, as is my right as your wife and the mistress of this household." For a moment, she thought he might refuse to answer, might retreat behind the wall of icy formality that had characterized their early interactions. Instead, he moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames as though seeking guidance from their dancing light. "Eleanor's fortune," he began quietly, "was squandered by her father long before I met her. She came to me with nothing but her gentle spirit and the title that would eventually pass to me upon her death. I married her knowing this, caring nothing for material considerations. He turned to face Clara once more, his expression softened by painful memory. As for requiring your fortune, I needed nothing from you save the alliance itself, which served to silence certain rumors regarding Eleanor's final illness and my care of her. Rumors, Clara echoed, bewildered by this unexpected turn. The Duke's jaw tightened. There were those who suggested I had hastened her end to secure the title. Vicious, baseless allegations, yet sufficient to damage my standing and, more importantly, to tarnish her memory. Understanding dawned in Clara's mind with devastating clarity, and a respectable second marriage would quell such rumors. Precisely. He approached her writing desk, placing the anonymous letter upon its surface with evident distaste. Now I must ask a question in return. What else has your father sent you? Clara's breath caught in her throat. How did you know? The handwriting on this envelope matches that of your father's solicitor. I recognize it from our negotiations regarding your settlement. His gaze held hers, unflinching. Show me, Clara. It was the first time he had used her given name, the intimate address sending an unexpected shiver through her, despite the tension between them. Wordlessly, she retrieved her father's letter and the accompanying document, placing them in her husband's hands. He examined them with methodical thoroughness, his expression growing darker with each moment. When he looked up, his eyes held such controlled fury that Clara instinctively stepped backward. Your father, he said with deadly precision, is attempting to manipulate you into committing a crime on his behalf. This document is a forgery, created to suggest I altered our original agreement. Had you substituted it as he demanded, both you and I would have been vulnerable to his perpetual extortion. Relief flooded Clara's veins, followed immediately by shame at having harbored even momentary doubts regarding her husband's integrity. I would never have complied with his demands, she assured him softly. I merely sought to understand the truth before approaching you. The Duke's expression softened marginally. And now that you have it? Now I know with certainty what I have long suspected, that my father's concern extends only to his own interests, never to mine. She moved to the fireplace, adding quietly, and I know that I have wronged you by entertaining doubts regarding your character, however briefly. He followed her to the hearth, close enough that she could sense his presence without turning. You have not wronged me, Clara. Caution is wisdom when one has been raised amidst deception. She turned to face him then, finding his expression more open than she had ever seen it, vulnerable almost in its unguarded humanity. What shall we do about these letters? She asked. We shall preserve them as evidence, should your father attempt further mischief. The Duke's voice hardened momentarily before softening once more. And then, with your permission, I should like to return to the progress we were making before these unpleasantries intruded upon our peace. Clara felt warmth spreading through her chest at his words, not the heat of passion, but the gentler glow of deepening connection. I should like that as well, she admitted. He extended his hand toward her, a simple gesture, yet laden with significance. After a moment's hesitation, Clara placed her own within it, feeling the warmth of his flesh against her fingers like a promise. I have brought something for you from London, he said, leading her from the library toward the music room. A small token that I hope might please you. The door opened to reveal a sheet of music placed upon the piano's stand, not handwritten but professionally printed and bound. The title page read simply, Hymn for the Unheard, composed by Lady Catherine Veilhart, completed by Lady Clara Veilhart. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she approached the instrument with wondering steps. You had it published? A private printing only, he clarified, watching her reaction with evident anxiety. I thought perhaps, that is, I believed my mother would have wished her voice, and yours, to be heard beyond these walls. Tears blurred Clara's vision as she touched the printed page with trembling fingers. For the first time since her arrival at Thornfield, she felt not merely accepted but valued, her contribution acknowledged, her voice amplified rather than silenced. Thank you, she whispered, the simple words inadequate to express the emotion welling within her breast. The Duke moved to stand beside her, his hand coming to rest lightly upon her shoulder. Will you play it? I should like to hear the finished piece in its entirety. Clara seated herself at the piano, her fingers finding the keys with familiar ease. As the first notes of Lady Catherine's composition filled the room, she glanced up to find her husband watching her with an expression that made her heart quicken its pace. For in his eyes she glimpsed not the calculating assessment of a man who had acquired a bride of convenience, but the dawning wonder of one who had discovered an unexpected treasure within his own household. The music swelled beneath her hands, carrying them both toward some unspoken destination neither had anticipated when they had exchanged their cold, formal vows merely weeks before. February arrived with unexpected clemency, bringing mild breezes that melted snowdrifts and coaxed tentative birdsong from the skeletal trees surrounding Thornfield. Within the great house, a similar thaw progressed, gradual yet undeniable, as barriers of formality and mistrust dissolved between its master and mistress. Clara found herself anticipating her husband's company with growing eagerness, their evenings now spent in shared pursuits rather than polite separation. Sometimes they read aloud to one another from volumes of poetry or philosophy. Other evenings, she would play the piano while he listened with evident appreciation. Occasionally, they simply sat in companionable silence, each absorbed in private thoughts, yet somehow together in their solitude. They had not spoken further of her father's attempted blackmail, nor of the anonymous letter that had precipitated their most honest conversation. These matters had been sealed away with the documents themselves in the Duke's private safe, acknowledged but not permitted to cast shadows over their evolving relationship. On this particular afternoon, Clara sat in the conservatory, a space she had discovered and reclaimed from neglect during her exploration of Thornfield's lesser-used chambers. The glass-walled room caught the pale winter sunlight, nurturing the few hardy plants that had survived years of minimal attention. With Mrs. Winter's permission, Clara had ordered the space thoroughly cleaned and had begun the process of restoring it to its former glory, already envisioning the profusion of blooms that might grace its shelves come spring. "You have worked wonders here," observed the Dowager Duchess, who had arrived for her customary afternoon visit and accompanied Clara on her rounds of the estate. Catherine adored this room. She would spend hours tending her exotic specimens, orchids from India, ferns from the Americas. After her passing, Gabriel could not bear to enter it. Clara's hands stilled in the act of pruning a leggy geranium. "Perhaps I should not have presumed." "Nonsense," interrupted the Dowager briskly. "The living must reclaim spaces from grief, or homes become mausoleums. Gabriel understands this, even if he cannot yet articulate it." They worked together in comfortable silence for some minutes, the Dowager seated on a wrought-iron bench, while Clara continued her gentle renovation of the neglected plants. "He watches you, you know," the older woman remarked casually, adjusting her shawl against the slight chill. "When you are occupied elsewhere, playing the piano, reading in the library, overseeing the household, I have not seen such attention in his gaze since Eleanor." Clara felt warmth rising to her cheeks, her hands suddenly unsteady as she clipped a withered stem. "You mistake his interest, Your Grace. The Duke merely observes my management of his household, ensuring I perform my duties adequately." "My dear," the Dowager replied with gentle amusement, "I have observed men watching women for nearly 7 decades. I know the difference between assessment and admiration. Gabriel looks at you as one who has discovered an unexpected oasis after years of traversing desert wastes." Before Clara could formulate a response to this startling declaration, the conservatory door opened to admit the subject of their discussion. The Duke paused upon the threshold, his gaze taking in the transformed space with evident surprise. "Aunt Margaret," he acknowledged the Dowager with a respectful nod, before turning his attention to Clara. "I was informed I might find you here." "Your wife has performed miracles," declared the Dowager, rising from her seat with the aid of her walking stick. "Catherine's sanctuary lives once more." The Duke's expression flickered with complex emotion as he surveyed the rejuvenated space. "Indeed," he murmured, "I had not expected to see life return to what grief had claimed," the Dowager suggested softly. "That is the natural order of things, nephew. Death yields eventually to renewal, always." A charged silence followed this philosophical observation, broken when the Dowager announced her intention to take tea in the drawing-room. "You will both join me shortly, I trust," she added, her tone making it less request than command. When she had departed, closing the conservatory door behind her with deliberate finality, Clara and the Duke found themselves alone amid the greenery and watery sunlight. "I hope I have not presumed too greatly in restoring this space," Clara ventured, suddenly anxious that she had trespassed upon sacred memory. The Duke approached slowly, his gaze traveling from the pruned plants to the cleaned glass panes, through which afternoon light streamed in misty radiance. "On the contrary," he replied, his voice unusually gentle. You have reminded me that beauty need not be abandoned to decay merely because its original cultivator is gone. He reached out to touch a fragile fern frond, his fingers surprisingly delicate for a man of his stature. My mother would be pleased, he added softly. She always said gardens were proof of hope. One plants without certainty that one will live to see the bloom. Clara watched his profile, struck by the vulnerability evident in his expression, a softening of the stern features she had first encountered upon their wedding day. I found sketches, she admitted, in a portfolio beneath the potting bench, plans for spring plantings, drawings of arrangements. I thought perhaps when the weather warms fully, you would recreate her vision, he asked, turning to regard her with intensity that made her breath catch. Not recreate, Clara corrected gently. Continue. As with the hymn, some voices deserve to be carried forward, not merely commemorated. Something shifted in his gaze, a recognition, perhaps, or a decision reached after long deliberation. You understand preservation without stagnation, he observed. It is a rare wisdom. Clara felt warmth blooming within her breast at this unexpected praise. I merely do what feels right. The past should inform our present without imprisoning it. Indeed. He gestured toward the door. Shall we join my formidable aunt before she dispatches servants to retrieve us bodily? As they walked together through the corridors of Thornfield, Clara became acutely aware of his presence beside her, not looming or intimidating as it once had seemed, but protective, companionable. Their arms brushed occasionally, each fleeting contact sending ripples of awareness through her being. That evening, after dinner concluded and the Dowager had departed for the Dower House, the Duke invited Clara to join him in the library rather than retiring immediately, as was their custom. I have received correspondence from London that concerns us both, he explained, leading her to the comfortable chairs arranged before the fireplace. Clara felt a flutter of apprehension, remembering the last time unexpected correspondence had disrupted their peace. Nothing unpleasant, I hope. Quite the contrary. He retrieved a letter from his desk drawer, returning to seat himself opposite her. It seems your musical collaboration with my mother has attracted attention beyond our private circle. The Royal Philharmonic Society has requested permission to perform Hymn for the Unheard at their spring concert series. Clara's hand flew to her throat in astonishment. But how did they obtain knowledge of its existence? You said the printing was private. I may have sent a copy to my mother's former music master, who now serves as conductor for the society. The Duke's expression held a hint of sheepishness, an endearing crack in his usual composure. I did not anticipate such an enthusiastic response. I am overwhelmed, Clara admitted, her mind struggling to comprehend this unexpected development. To have your mother's work performed in such a venue? Our mother's work, he corrected gently. The composition belongs to you both now. The simple acknowledgement of her contribution brought unexpected tears to Clara's eyes. Throughout her life, her accomplishments had been dismissed or appropriated by others, her father claiming credit for her management of his household, her siblings exploiting her efforts without acknowledgement. Never had she received such straightforward recognition of her abilities. Thank you, she whispered, the words inadequate yet heartfelt. The Duke leaned forward, his gaze intent upon her face. There is more, he continued. The Society has requested our presence at the performance. It would mean a journey to London, a stay of perhaps 2 weeks. I told them I would consult with you before responding. You wish me to accompany you to London? Clara clarified, startled by this unexpected proposal. I wish nothing that does not align with your own desires, he replied carefully. But yes, I would be honored to present you to society as my Duchess, not merely as an adjunct to my position, but as an accomplished woman in your own right. The offer represented far more than a simple journey. It was a public declaration of his respect, perhaps even his growing affection. Clara felt her heart quickening at the implications. I should like that very much, she admitted softly. His expression warmed with evident pleasure at her acceptance. Then I shall make the arrangements. We will depart at month's end, when travelling conditions improve further. They sat in comfortable silence for several moments, the fire crackling gently in the grate, casting flickering shadows across the book-lined walls. Clara found herself studying her husband's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the thoughtful set of his mouth, the occasional reflection of firelight in his eyes. How different he seemed from the cold, formal man who had stood beside her at the altar merely months ago. Gabriel, she said, using his given name for the first time, the intimate address causing him to turn toward her with surprise evident in his features. May I ask you something of a personal nature? He nodded, his expression carefully neutral yet attentive. You may ask anything you wish. Clara chose her words with deliberate care. When we were first married, you established certain expectations regarding our relationship. A union of respect and appropriate distance, I believe you called it. I recall my words, he acknowledged, his voice betraying nothing of his thoughts. I wonder if... She paused, gathering courage before continuing. If your views on that arrangement have altered in any way given our recent understanding. His eyes held hers with unexpected warmth. They have altered considerably, he admitted softly. Though I would not presume... The library door opened suddenly, revealing a breathless footman. Your Grace, urgent news from London. The footman's appearance cast a pall over what had promised to be a moment of profound connection between Clara and her husband. The Duke rose immediately, his features composing themselves into the mask of aristocratic control she had once found so intimidating. Speak, he commanded, accepting the sealed letter the servant extended with trembling hands. A messenger rode through the night, Your Grace. He awaits below should you require immediate response. The Duke broke the seal with practiced efficiency, scanning the contents with increasing gravity. Clara observed the subtle tightening of his jaw, the slight narrowing of his eyes, signs she had learned to interpret during their months together. What news? She inquired softly when the footman had been dismissed. Gabriel looked up, seemingly startled to find her still present, as though the contents of the letter had transported him to some distant mental landscape. Forgive me, he said, his voice regaining its customary steadiness. It appears my presence is required in London with greater urgency than anticipated. Lord Hartfield has died suddenly, leaving the chairmanship of the Parliamentary Committee on Colonial Affairs vacant. As his deputy, I am summoned to assume his responsibilities until a permanent replacement is appointed. Clara absorbed this information, recognizing its significance. Her husband rarely spoke of his political activities, yet she had gleaned from household correspondence that his position commanded considerable respect among his peers. When must you depart? She asked, already calculating what arrangements would be necessary. At first light, he hesitated, visibly conflicted. Clara, I must ask that I accompany you, she finished for him, rising from her chair with quiet determination. Of course, I shall instruct my maid to begin packing immediately. Surprise registered briefly in his expression. You understand, this is not the leisurely introduction to London society I had envisioned. The circumstances will necessitate long hours of parliamentary business, leaving you frequently alone in unfamiliar surroundings. I understand perfectly, she assured him. Yet I would rather be alone in London than remain at Thornfield while you face these responsibilities without support. Unless, she added, sudden doubt clouding her certainty, you would prefer I remain behind. No, he answered with unexpected swiftness. That is, I would welcome your companionship if you are certain it would not prove disagreeable. The exchange was interrupted by Mrs. Winters, who appeared at the library door with her customary efficiency. Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace, but cook requires instructions regarding tomorrow's meals given the late hour. Clara turned to her husband with newfound confidence. If you will excuse me, I shall see to the household arrangements for our departure. There is much to be done before morning. He inclined his head, something like admiration warming his gaze. As always, I defer to your superior management of domestic matters. The night passed in a flurry of activity. Trunks packed, servants instructed, arrangements made for the estate's management during their absence. Clara moved through these tasks with practiced competence, finding unexpected pleasure in applying her organizational skills to a purpose that united rather than separated her from her husband. Dawn found them departing Thornfield in the Duke's well-appointed travelling carriage, the pale winter sun just beginning to gild the eastern horizon. Clara watched the great house recede in the distance, struck by how differently she regarded it now, compared to her arrival as a nervous bride. What had once seemed an imposing prison had somehow transformed into a sanctuary. She was reluctant to leave. We shall return within the month, Gabriel remarked, noting her backward glance. Sooner, if parliamentary business permits. Clara turned to him with a small smile. I was merely reflecting on how one's perception of a place can change with time and experience. Indeed, his gaze held hers with unexpected warmth, and not only places, but people as well. The journey to London required 2 days of travel, with an overnight stay at a coaching inn of superior quality. Clara had never ventured beyond the confines of her father's modest country estate and the neighbouring village. Each mile brought new sights that she observed with quiet wonderment. Gabriel proved an attentive travelling companion, pointing out landmarks of historical significance and sharing childhood memories of journeys taken alongside his mother. These glimpses into his early years revealed a vulnerability beneath his formal exterior that endeared him to Clara in ways she had not anticipated. They arrived in London as evening descended, the city's countless windows glowing with lamplight against the darkening sky. Clara peered from the carriage window, momentarily overwhelmed by the cacophony of sounds, the press of buildings, the sheer vitality of metropolitan existence. "It can be rather overwhelming at first," Gabriel observed, watching her reaction with gentle understanding, "though you will find our townhouse provides adequate sanctuary from the city's ceaseless activity." The Thornfield London residence occupied a prime position in Grosvenor Square, its elegant facade distinguished by tasteful restraint rather than ostentatious display. A liveried butler and several footmen awaited their arrival, moving with practiced efficiency to unload luggage and escort them within. "Welcome to Thornfield House, Your Grace," the butler intoned, bowing deeply to Clara. "We have prepared the Duchess's suite as instructed." Gabriel escorted her through the entrance hall, its proportions less imposing than Thornfield proper, yet no less elegant. "I regret that I must attend to correspondence immediately," he explained as they climbed the main staircase. "Parliamentary matters wait for no man, it seems. Will you be comfortable retiring without company this evening?" "Of course," Clara assured him, concealing her disappointment beneath practiced composure. "You must attend to your responsibilities without concern for my entertainment." He paused at the top of the stairs, regarding her with an expression that suggested he saw through her polite acquiescence. "Perhaps," he ventured, "you might join me in the study after you have refreshed yourself. The business is tedious, but your presence would make it considerably less so." The invitation, tentative yet sincere, warmed Clara's heart more than any grand gesture could have done. "I should like that very much," she replied softly. Her suite of rooms proved elegant without ostentation, decorated in soothing shades of blue and silver. A pianoforte occupied one corner, a thoughtful inclusion that suggested Gabriel had anticipated her preferences. Clara allowed her maid to assist with changing into a simple evening gown before dismissing her for the night. When she descended to the study, she found Gabriel seated at a massive desk, papers spread before him in organized disarray. He looked up at her entrance, his features softening from concentration into welcome. "Forgive the chaos," he said, gesturing to the documents. Lord Hartfield's affairs were not maintained with particular system. Clara moved to stand beside him, surveying the jumble of correspondence, reports, and parliamentary notes. "Perhaps I might assist? I have some experience organizing household accounts and correspondence." He regarded her with surprise that quickly transformed into thoughtful consideration. "These are not mere household matters, but affairs of state that many would consider beyond a woman's proper sphere." "And what do you consider my proper sphere?" she inquired, a gentle challenge in her tone. A smile, rare and transformative, briefly illuminated his features. "Increasingly I find myself unable to discern its boundaries. Very well. If you are willing, I would welcome your assistance." Thus began an unexpected partnership. As Gabriel explained the committee's function and challenges, Clara applied her organizational skills to imposing order upon chaos. Hours passed in comfortable collaboration, punctuated by occasional discoveries that prompted discussion, or even, surprisingly, laughter. "How is it possible," Gabriel remarked as midnight approached, "that we have accomplished more in one evening than I anticipated achieving in 3 days? Perhaps because you have been laboring under the misapprehension that political affairs require entirely different skills than household management," Clara suggested, arranging a final stack of correspondence by date and urgency. "In truth, both require attention to detail, systematic thinking, and diplomatic consideration of competing interests." He leaned back in his chair, regarding her with undisguised admiration. "You continue to surprise me, Clara Valhart." The use of her married name, spoken with such evident respect, sent warmth spreading through her chest. "Is that a desirable quality in a duchess?" she inquired lightly. "In a duchess? Perhaps not traditionally," his voice lowered, intimate in the lamp-lit study. "In a wife I find it increasingly essential." The distinction between her title and her more personal relationship to him hung in the air between them, pregnant with implication. Before Clara could formulate a response, the mantel clock chimed midnight, breaking the moment's spell. "It grows late," Gabriel observed, rising from his desk with evident reluctance. "You must be exhausted from our journey." "A little," Clara admitted, though in truth she had never felt more vibrantly alive than in these hours of shared purpose. He escorted her to the foot of the stairs, pausing there with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Thank you," he said finally, "for your assistance tonight, and for accompanying me to London on such short notice." "I am your wife," she replied simply. "Where else would I be but at your side?" The words emerged without calculation, a truth she had not fully recognized until its utterance. Gabriel's expression softened, his gaze holding hers with newfound intensity. "Good night, Clara," he said softly, lifting her hand to his lips in a gesture more tender than formal. "Good night, Gabriel." As Clara ascended the stairs to her suite, she realized with startling clarity that something fundamental had shifted between them. The marriage of convenience, the union of respect and appropriate distance, had begun to transform into something neither had anticipated, a true partnership of minds, and perhaps of hearts as well. Outside her window, London's vast expanse glittered with countless lights, a constellation of human endeavor spread beneath the night sky. Clara stood watching for long moments, feeling as though she stood upon the threshold of some new understanding of herself, of her husband, of the possibilities that lay before them. The soft knock at her chamber door startled her from reverie. "Enter," she called, expecting her lady's maid returning to assist with preparations for bed. Instead, Gabriel himself appeared, still fully dressed, his expression a complex mixture of determination and uncertainty. "Forgive the intrusion," he began, remaining upon the threshold. "But there is a matter I failed to address earlier, and I find I cannot rest until it is resolved." Clara moved toward him, concern evident in her features. "What troubles you at this late hour?" "Not trouble," he corrected quickly. "Rather an unfinished conversation." He drew a deep breath, as though gathering courage for some momentous declaration. "Earlier this evening in the library at Thornfield, you asked if my views regarding our arrangement had altered." Clara felt her heart quicken its pace, remembering the moment of connection that had been interrupted. "I did. I gave you no proper answer then. I should like to remedy that omission now if you are willing to hear me." She nodded, unable to trust her voice as hope and apprehension mingled in her breast. "When we wed," Gabriel continued, his voice low and measured, "I believed myself incapable of genuine connection. Eleanor's death had convinced me that emotional entanglement brought only pain. I sought in you a suitable partner who would maintain appropriate distance. A colleague in the business of maintaining Thornfield and its legacy, nothing more." He stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind him with quiet deliberation. "I was wrong, Clara. Profoundly, incomprehensibly wrong. In seeking to protect myself from further loss, I nearly overlooked the possibility of finding something I had never truly experienced before." "And what is that?" she whispered, scarcely daring to breathe. "Partnership," he answered simply. "Not merely in domestic matters or social obligations, but in understanding, in purpose, in vision for what life might become." He moved closer, close enough that she could discern the subtle scent of sandalwood that always accompanied him, could see the flickering lamplight reflected in his eyes. "I do not presume to speak of love," he continued carefully. "Such declarations would be premature, perhaps unwelcome, but I would ask if you might consider allowing our arrangement to evolve beyond its original parameters." Clara regarded him steadily, finding courage in his vulnerability. "I have long since ceased viewing our marriage as merely an arrangement, Gabriel. The question is whether you are prepared to do the same." "I am," he affirmed without hesitation, "though I cannot promise I will navigate this uncharted territory without missteps. Emotional openness does not come naturally to me after so many years of studied reserve." A smile, genuine and unguarded, curved Clara's lips. "Then we shall learn together, each making allowances for the other's uncertainties." Gabriel reached for her hand, enfolding it within his own with exquisite gentleness. "I would like that very much." The simple contact, freely offered and accepted, seemed to seal some unspoken covenant between them. Clara felt the last vestiges of guardedness dissolving, replaced by tentative yet unmistakable hope for what their future might hold. "It grows late," Gabriel observed reluctantly. "I should let you rest." "Yes," Clara agreed, though every fiber of her being wished to prolong this moment of newfound understanding. "Tomorrow brings many responsibilities." He raised her hand to his lips once more, the gesture transformed from formal courtesy to genuine affection. "Until morning, then." As the door closed behind him, Clara pressed her fingers to her lips, preserving the warmth of his touch. Outside her window, the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, a fitting symbol, she thought, for the new day dawning in their marriage as well. London's parliamentary session began with appropriate pomp and circumstance, drawing the empire's political elite into its ritualized proceedings. Clara observed from the ladies' gallery, watching as Gabriel assumed his temporary position with the gravity and assurance she had come to expect of him. Though she had limited understanding of political nuance, she could discern from the respectful attention accorded his remarks that her husband commanded significant influence among his peers. The days that followed established a pattern unlike anything Clara had experienced in her previous existence. Mornings found her overseeing the London household, while Gabriel attended parliamentary sessions. Afternoons often involved social calls, a parade of aristocratic wives and daughters arriving to scrutinize the Duke's new bride, their curiosity thinly veiled beneath layers of etiquette. "You have caused quite the sensation," remarked Lady Harrington, a sharp-eyed matron whose approval apparently carried considerable social weight. "The Duke of Thornfield has been considered London's most determinedly unavailable widower these past 7 years. Many a mama had given up hope of securing him for their daughters." Clara maintained a serene expression, despite the implied question in the older woman's statement. "His Grace honors me with his esteem," she replied simply. "Indeed," Lady Harrington observed with penetrating assessment, "and you appear to have earned it through more substantial qualities than mere beauty or fortune. How refreshing." Each evening, Clara and Gabriel would retire to his study, where they continued their collaborative approach to organizing the committee's business. These hours became the highlight of Clara's days. Comfortable silences, interspersed with substantive conversation, occasional touches that lingered longer than propriety strictly dictated, shared smiles that held growing warmth. On this particular evening, a formal diplomatic reception required the Duke and Duchess's attendance. Clara prepared with unusual care, her lady's maid arranging her hair in an elegant coiffure adorned with a simple strand of pearls, a gift from Gabriel that morning, presented with uncharacteristic shyness. "They were my mother's," he had explained, as she examined the lustrous spheres with wondering fingers. "I believe she would have approved of their new owner." Now, as Clara descended the main staircase in a gown of silver-blue silk that complemented her eyes, she found Gabriel awaiting her in the entrance hall, resplendent in formal evening attire. His expression as he beheld her sent warmth coursing through her veins. "You are magnificent," he said simply, offering his arm with courtly grace. "As are you," she replied, accepting the gesture with newfound confidence in her position both as Duchess and as wife. The reception was held at the Foreign Office, its grand ballroom illuminated by countless candles whose light reflected from crystal chandeliers and gilt mirrors. Distinguished guests from across Europe mingled with Britain's political and social elite, creating a tapestry of languages, titles, and diplomatic agendas. Clara remained at Gabriel's side through the initial formalities, accepting introductions with composed dignity. She had prepared diligently for this moment, studying diplomatic protocols and memorizing the names and positions of key figures they might encounter. "You navigate these waters with remarkable assurance," Gabriel observed during a brief moment of privacy between introductions. "One would think you had been born to diplomatic circles rather than thrust into them through marriage." "I observe and adapt," Clara replied with a modest smile, "though I confess I find the undercurrents of political alliance and rivalry rather similar to the social maneuverings of country neighborhoods, merely conducted on a grander scale." His laugh, a rare, rich sound that still surprised her when she managed to elicit it, drew curious glances from nearby guests unaccustomed to seeing the famously reserved Duke displaying such unguarded pleasure. "Lady Thornfield," interrupted a silky voice behind them, "how delightful to make your acquaintance at last." Clara turned to find herself facing a woman of striking beauty, dark-haired, alabaster-skinned, with eyes of unusual amber hue. Something in Gabriel's sudden tension alerted her that this encounter held significance beyond mere social pleasantry. "Lady Montrose," Gabriel acknowledged with formal correctness. "May I present my wife, the Duchess of Thornfield, Clara." Lady Montrose was acquainted with Eleanor during our time in London. Understanding dawned in Clara's mind. This woman had known Gabriel's first wife, perhaps had been present during that tragic period of his life. "I am pleased to meet any friend of Eleanor's," she said with genuine warmth. "His Grace speaks of her with great affection." "Does he indeed?" Lady Montrose's perfectly arched eyebrow rose in apparent surprise. "How evolved of him. There was a time when Eleanor's name could not be mentioned in his presence without provoking the most profound distress." The statement, delivered with silken malice disguised as concern, struck Clara as deliberately provocative. Gabriel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, his posture becoming more rigid. "Grief expresses itself differently with the passage of time," Clara observed calmly, "as does healing." Lady Montrose's gaze sharpened with assessment. How philosophical, and how convenient that healing should coincide so precisely with advantageous remarriage. Before Gabriel could respond to this thinly veiled insult, Clara placed her hand lightly upon his arm. "I consider it neither convenient nor inconvenient, merely fortunate," she replied with serene dignity. "For us both." Something flickered in Lady Montrose's expression, surprise perhaps at encountering neither jealous defensiveness nor intimidated retreat. "Well," she said after a moment, "you are certainly not what I expected, Lady Thornfield." "The highest compliment one can receive, I think," Clara responded with a genuine smile. "Now, if you'll excuse us, I believe the French ambassador is attempting to catch His Grace's attention." As they moved away, Clara felt Gabriel's hand cover hers where it rested upon his arm, a gesture of silent gratitude and approval. "That was masterfully handled," he murmured. "Victoria Montrose has made an art of cultivating discord through selective truths and strategic omissions." "She knew Eleanor well?" Clara inquired, keeping her tone conversational despite the undercurrent of tension the encounter had provoked. "They were childhood friends," Gabriel confirmed. Though their paths diverged significantly in adulthood, Eleanor maintained the connection out of loyalty rather than genuine affinity. He hesitated before adding quietly, "Victoria was among those who questioned my care of Eleanor during her final illness." Understanding crystallized in Clara's mind. This woman had been among those spreading the vicious rumors that had necessitated Gabriel's second marriage as a means of social rehabilitation. "I see," she said simply, allowing her hand to tighten briefly on his arm. "Then I am particularly glad to have made her acquaintance." Gabriel looked down at her with surprise. "Are you?" "Indeed. It is always valuable to know the source of poison in one's garden. Makes it much easier to apply the appropriate remedy." A smile, genuine and unguarded, transformed his features momentarily. "You continue to astonish me, Clara Valhart." The remainder of the evening passed in a whirl of introductions, diplomatic conversations, and the intricate dance of political socialization. Throughout it all, Clara maintained her composure, occasionally catching Gabriel watching her with expressions ranging from pride to wonder to something deeper that made her heart quicken its pace. When they finally returned to Thornfield House in the early hours of the morning, Clara felt exhilarated rather than exhausted by the evening's events. "I had not anticipated how invigorating such gatherings could be," she admitted, as they climbed the main staircase together. "The interplay of personalities, the subtle negotiations of influence and alliance, it is rather like watching a complex game of chess. Most find it tedious rather than stimulating," Gabriel observed, studying her with evident fascination. "You have an unusual mind, Clara. Is that a compliment or an observation?" she inquired lightly. "Both." They had reached the landing where their paths would traditionally diverge, her chambers in the east wing, his in the west, a separation maintained since their arrival in London, despite the evolving nature of their relationship. Gabriel hesitated, something like uncertainty flickering in his normally assured demeanor. "Would you, that is, might I offer you a nightcap in the library? The hour is late, but I find myself reluctant to conclude our evening just yet." The invitation represented more than a simple prolongation of their time together. It acknowledged the growing intimacy between them, the desire for connection that extended beyond duty or convention. "I should like that very much," Clara replied softly. The library, unlike its grander counterpart at Thornfield proper, offered a more intimate atmosphere. Bookshelves lining 3 walls, comfortable chairs arranged before a small hearth where embers still glowed with subdued warmth. Gabriel added a log, coaxing the fire back to gentle life while Clara settled herself in one of the chairs. "I received correspondence from the Royal Philharmonic Society today," he remarked, pouring 2 small glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. "They have scheduled the performance of Hymn for the Unheard for the 3rd of next month, should parliamentary business permit our attendance." Clara accepted the offered glass with murmured thanks. "I confess the prospect fills me with equal measures of excitement and trepidation. To have your mother's work, our work, performed in such a venue seems almost surreal." "You deserve the recognition," Gabriel said simply, taking the chair opposite hers. "Your contribution transformed what might have remained merely a fragment into something complete and profoundly moving." Warmth that had nothing to do with the fire or the spirits in her glass spread through Clara's chest at his words. Throughout her life, she had received little acknowledgement for her abilities or accomplishments. To be so straightforwardly valued stirred emotions she scarcely knew how to name. "I have been thinking," Gabriel continued after a moment's contemplation, "about our conversation regarding the evolution of our arrangement." Clara's heart quickened its pace. "Yes? It occurs to me that I have been remiss in not making my intentions, my hopes, more explicitly clear." He set aside his glass, leaning forward with uncharacteristic intensity. "When I spoke of partnership, I meant something far more comprehensive than mere cooperation in practical matters. I find myself, that is, I have begun to—" The library door burst open without warning, revealing the butler in a state of unusual discomposure. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace, but but there is a situation requiring immediate attention. Gabriel rose immediately, his features composing themselves into their customary mask of control. What has occurred? A gentleman has arrived in considerable distress, insisting upon seeing her Grace without delay. He claims to be the Conde de Marin and refuses to depart despite the unseemly hour. Clara felt the blood drain from her face at this announcement. Her father's appearance in London, at their townhouse in the middle of the night, nothing good could come of such a visitation. Gabriel's expression darkened with controlled anger. I believe I made my position regarding the Conde's access to this household perfectly clear. Indeed, Your Grace. However, he appears, the butler hesitated, choosing his words with diplomatic care. He appears to be in some physical distress, possibly injured, and most insistent that the matter concerns her Grace's sister. Clara rose swiftly, her personal apprehension giving way to concern. Whatever her father's faults, if Isabel was in danger, she could not ignore the situation. Where is he now? In the entrance hall, Your Grace. I took the liberty of offering refreshment, which he declined most forcefully. Gabriel turned to Clara, his expression grave. You need not see him. Whatever manipulation he attempts, we can send him away with appropriate assistance if his condition truly requires it. Clara appreciated the protective impulse behind his words, yet something in her had shifted since their last encounter with her father. Where once she had felt only fear and obligation in his presence, she now recognized the emptiness of his power over her. I shall see him, she decided firmly, but not alone. I would have you beside me, if you are willing. Relief and approval mingled in Gabriel's gaze. Always, he affirmed simply. Together they descended to the entrance hall, where the Conde de Marin paced with agitated energy, despite his apparent physical distress. His right arm hung at an unnatural angle, his face bore evidence of recent violence, and his clothing, once fine, now soiled and torn, suggested desperate flight rather than planned journey. Father, Clara acknowledged, maintaining a dignified distance. You appear unwell. The Conde's wild gaze fixed upon her with feverish intensity. Unwell? Is that what you call it when men are set upon by creditors' thugs? When one's own flesh and blood abandons family obligation for selfish comfort? His voice rose with each word, edged with hysteria, and what Clara now recognized as genuine fear. Perhaps you might explain the purpose of your visit more directly, Gabriel suggested, his tone deceptively mild, despite the tension evident in his posture. It is uncommonly late for social calls. Social? The Conde barked a laugh entirely devoid of humor. Nothing social about it, Thornfield. I've come because your wife's sister has been taken. Clara felt her breath catch. Taken? What do you mean? By whom? By the Duke of Harrington's men, her father spat. Or on his orders, at least. He claims Isabel attempted to compromise his son, that the family's reputation is at stake. They've spirited her away to some remote estate to await the scandal's resolution. Gabriel frowned, his analytical mind clearly processing this jumbled account. Lord Harrington's son is barely 17, not yet of marriageable age. What possible compromise could have occurred? The girl was desperate, the Conde muttered, avoiding Clara's gaze. After you cut off our funds, sacrifices had to be made, connections cultivated by whatever means necessary. Understanding dawned in Clara's mind with sickening clarity. You encouraged Isabel to pursue the Harrington heir, a boy 5 years her junior, still at Eton. I merely suggested she make herself agreeable to the family, her father protested weakly. How was I to know she would take matters to such extremes? Gabriel's expression hardened to granite. You sold one daughter to settle your debts. When that resource was exhausted, you attempted to sell another, this time to a child barely out of short pants. The Conde drew himself up with wounded dignity that might have been comical under less dire circumstances. I did what was necessary to preserve our family's position. And now? Clara inquired, her voice steady despite the turmoil of emotions his revelations had provoked. What do you expect of us? Intervention, her father replied immediately. Thornfield's influence could secure Isabel's release, smooth over the incident. The Duke respects you, fears you perhaps. One word from you could end this unpleasantness. Gabriel's laugh held no mirth. One word from me would more likely result in your immediate arrest for attempting to orchestrate the seduction of a minor nobleman. The law takes a rather dim view of such enterprises, particularly when they cross the boundaries between coercion and consent. The Conde blanched, his already pallid features growing ashen. You wouldn't dare. The scandal would touch your own household through Clara. I think you underestimate society's capacity to distinguish between those who commit transgressions and those merely connected to transgressors by blood, Gabriel observed coldly. My wife's reputation is beyond reproach. Yours, however, appears increasingly indefensible. Clara placed a restraining hand upon her husband's arm, not in defense of her father, but in recognition of the larger issue at stake. Isabel may have been misguided, even culpable, but she remains my sister. I cannot abandon her to whatever fate the Harringtons deem appropriate for her transgression. Gabriel studied her face for a long moment, before nodding once, decisively. Very well. I shall make inquiries regarding your sister's situation first thing tomorrow. If she has indeed been removed to a country estate as your father suggests, we shall determine her exact whereabouts and condition. The Condé sagged with visible relief. Then you'll intervene on her behalf. I shall do what is right and just, Gabriel replied with careful precision. Nothing more, nothing less. Clara turned to her father, mustering compassion despite the revulsion his actions provoked. You require medical attention for your injuries. We shall provide it along with suitable accommodation for tonight. Tomorrow, once we have ascertained Isabel's situation, we can discuss what may be done. The Condé opened his mouth as though to protest this measured response, clearly having anticipated a more emotional reaction from his daughter. Finding himself faced instead with composed determination, he subsided into sullen acquiescence. Gabriel signaled to the waiting butler. See that the Condé is attended by our physician and provided quarters in the east wing. Post footmen at his door, for his protection naturally. As servants led her father away, Clara found herself trembling, not with fear as in previous encounters, but with a complex mixture of anger, concern, and grim resolution. Gabriel's hand came to rest lightly upon her shoulder, steadying her with its warm presence. You need not involve yourself in this sordid business, he said quietly. I can manage the situation without subjecting you to further distress. Clara covered his hand with her own, drawing strength from the connection. Isabel may have been complicit in our father's schemes, but she is barely 18, scarcely more than a child herself, raised in an environment where a woman's value is measured solely by the advantages she can secure through marriage. I cannot condemn her without at least attempting to understand. Gabriel's expression softened with something like wonder. Your capacity for compassion continually amazes me, Clara. Where others might seek retribution or distance, you offer understanding. Not always, she admitted with rueful honesty. I find it considerably easier to extend compassion to Isabel than to my father, despite his evident distress. As any rational person would, Gabriel observed dryly. There is a significant difference between youthful error and calculated exploitation. Clara sighed, the evening's events having thoroughly banished the warmth and connection they had been building before her father's dramatic arrival. It grows late, she observed reluctantly. We should retire if we are to address this situation effectively tomorrow. Gabriel nodded, though she detected similar reluctance in his expression. Indeed, though I regret the interruption of what promised to be a significant conversation between us. As do I, Clara admitted softly, though perhaps it is just as well. Some declarations are better made when not shadowed by crisis. His fingers tightened briefly upon her shoulder before releasing her. Rest well, Clara. Morning will bring clearer perspective on all matters. As she ascended the stairs toward her chambers, Clara found herself reflecting on the remarkable transformation in her circumstances since her marriage. Months ago, her father's appearance would have reduced her to trembling submission. Tonight, she had faced him with composed strength. The difference, she realized, lay not merely in Gabriel's protective presence, but in her own evolving sense of self-worth, a metamorphosis catalyzed by her husband's growing respect and evident admiration. Outside her window, London's vast expanse glittered beneath a waning moon, countless lives unfolding in parallel to her own. Somewhere within that sprawling metropolis, her sister awaited discovery and, perhaps, redemption. Clara gazed at the distant horizon, where the first hint of dawn would eventually appear. Drawing strength from the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, she would face them not alone, but in partnership with the man who had begun as her formal husband and was evolving day by day into something far more profound. Morning brought sobering clarity to the previous night's revelations. Gabriel departed early to make discreet inquiries regarding Isabel's situation, leaving Clara to contend with her father over breakfast. The Condé, somewhat restored by medical attention and a night's rest, had recovered his habitual arrogance despite remaining essentially at their mercy. I trust Thornfield has already set things in motion, he remarked, helping himself to a generous portion of kedgeree. The sooner this unpleasantness is resolved, the better for all concerned. Clara regarded him steadily across the breakfast table, noting the calculation behind his apparent concern. By resolved, I presume you mean arranged to your advantage regardless of Isabel's well-being or the ethical considerations involved. The Condé's expression hardened. Your newfound moral superiority ill becomes you, daughter. Need I remind you that your own marriage was arranged with similar pragmatism? Similar, perhaps, but not identical, Clara countered calmly. My marriage involved no deception, no attempted compromise of an underage heir, no violation of basic decency. Decency, her father scoffed. A luxury afforded those with secure fortunes. The rest of us must be practical. Clara felt pity stir beneath her contempt, pity for a man so thoroughly corrupted by desperation and self-interest that he could no longer distinguish between pragmatism and predation. There is nothing practical about destroying Isabel's reputation and future prospects for short-term gain. Further argument was forestalled by Gabriel's return, his expression grave as he entered the breakfast room. "Good morning," he acknowledged with formal correctness, before turning to Clara. "Might I have a word with you in private?" Clara rose immediately, following her husband to the adjacent morning room, where morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, belying the seriousness of their discussion. "I have spoken with Lord Harrington directly," Gabriel began without preamble. "The situation is both better and worse than your father represented." Clara steeled herself, clasping her hands tightly to still their trembling. "Please tell me plainly. Isabel is indeed at Harrington's country estate in Kent, but not as a prisoner. She sought sanctuary there of her own accord, fleeing your father's increasingly desperate schemes." Gabriel's expression softened with compassion. "She wrote to Lady Harrington, who was once acquainted with your mother, begging assistance. The Duchess took pity and offered her protection." Relief flooded Clara's veins. "Then she is safe, not compromised." "There was an incident involving young Lord Edmund, though not as your father described. Isabel apparently attempted to follow your father's instructions to secure the boy's interest, but found herself unable to proceed with anything truly compromising." Gabriel's mouth tightened with distaste. "She broke down and confessed everything to Lady Harrington, who immediately removed her from the situation." "Thank God," Clara whispered, momentarily closing her eyes against threatening tears. "And what of the Harringtons' response? Surely they must be furious with my father's machinations." "Lord Harrington is understandably outraged. He was prepared to bring charges against the Condé until I intervened." Gabriel hesitated, his gaze searching her face. "I suggested an alternative resolution that would protect Isabel while ensuring justice is served." "What alternative?" Clara asked, a flutter of apprehension disturbing her relief. "Isabel will remain under Lady Harrington's protection and sponsorship, receiving proper education and eventually a modest but respectable introduction to society, far from your father's influence." His voice hardened slightly. "In exchange, the Condé will sign legal documents, relinquishing all parental authority over her, and depart England permanently. Lord Harrington has connections in the Colonial Office who can arrange an administrative position in India, remote, demanding but sufficient for basic sustenance." Clara absorbed these terms, recognizing both their mercy and their severity. "And if he refuses, then charges will be filed, and the full weight of the law will fall upon him." Gabriel's expression left no doubt regarding the consequences. "The evidence against him is substantial, Clara. His recent actions constitute attempted exploitation of a minor noble. The penalty would be imprisonment, at minimum." Clara nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the situation. "We must inform him immediately, though I suspect his reaction will be less than gracious." Indeed, the Condé's response to these terms bordered on apoplectic. "Exile? You propose exile as though it were mercy?" he thundered, pacing the morning room with frenetic energy. "And to surrender my paternal rights, my authority over my own daughter. Authority you have repeatedly abused," Gabriel observed coldly. "Consider carefully, sir. This offer represents considerably more clemency than your actions merit." "And what of you, Clara?" The Condé turned accusing eyes upon his eldest daughter. "Will you stand silent while your father is banished to the colonies?" Clara met his gaze steadily, years of intimidation falling away like discarded garments. "I will stand for what is right, for Isabel's well-being, and for justice tempered with compassion. This arrangement offers you freedom and livelihood, while protecting my sister from further exploitation. It is more than fair." The Condé's expression contorted with disbelief. "You have changed," he muttered, studying her as though she had become unrecognizable. "That man has hardened your heart against your own blood." "On the contrary," Clara replied softly, "he has taught me that love need not mean submission to cruelty, that duty can exist without exploitation. My heart is not hardened, merely awakened to truths I was too frightened to acknowledge before." Something in her calm certainty seemed to penetrate her father's bluster. He deflated visibly, sinking into a chair with the aspect of a man suddenly confronted with the ruin of all his schemes. I have no choice, it seems. There is always choice, Gabriel corrected him, though some alternatives carry heavier consequences than others. By afternoon, the necessary documents had been prepared and signed, the Conde de Maren's fate sealed by his own hand. He would depart for Southampton the following morning, then onward to India, aboard the next available vessel. Clara watched him sign away his parental rights with a complex mixture of emotions, regret for what might have been, relief for what would now be prevented. When he had been escorted to his chambers to prepare for departure, Clara found herself alone with Gabriel in the library, afternoon sunlight casting long shadows across the polished floor. "Thank you," she said simply, "for finding a solution that protects Isabel without being unnecessarily punitive." "It was the right course," he replied. "Justice need not always wear the face of vengeance." Clara studied his profile, struck anew by the depth of character that lay beneath his reserved exterior. "You are a good man, Gabriel Valahart. I am fortunate beyond measure to have found myself your wife." He turned to her, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Even under such circumstances? A marriage arranged for convenience rather than affection?" "Especially under such circumstances," Clara affirmed softly. "For we have had the opportunity to discover each other slowly, to build understanding upon foundation of respect, rather than fleeting passion." Gabriel moved closer, his gaze intent upon her face. "And what have you discovered, Clara Valahart? What do you see when you look upon the man you were obliged to wed?" "I see," she answered with simple honesty, "the man I have grown to love." The word hung between them, unplanned yet undeniable, a truth she had carried in her heart without fully acknowledging until this moment. Gabriel's breath caught audibly, his customary composure momentarily shattered by her declaration. "Clara," he whispered, her name a prayer upon his lips. "My impossible, astonishing Clara." His hands cradled her face with infinite tenderness, as though she were something precious beyond reckoning. "I have loved you," he confessed, "since the moment you completed my mother's hymn, since you gave voice to what had remained unheard within my own soul." When his lips met hers, the kiss bore nothing of duty or obligation, only the sweet surrender of two hearts, finding in each other what neither had dared hope to discover. Outside the library window, London continued its ceaseless activity, oblivious to the miracle unfolding within, the transformation of a cold union into something incandescent with genuine love. Spring arrived in London with unexpected gentleness, coaxing blossoms from reluctant branches and warming the city's stone facades with golden light. Within the Thornfield townhouse, a similar awakening had transpired, the formal distance between husband and wife giving way to genuine intimacy, tentative affection blossoming into acknowledged love. The Conde de Maren had departed for India as arranged, his absence lifting a shadow from Clara's spirit that she had carried so long she had ceased to notice its weight. Letters from Isabel arrived regularly from Kent, where she flourished under Lady Harrington's benevolent guidance, her natural intelligence finding expression in studies previously denied her. "She writes that Lady Harrington has engaged a music master for her," Clara remarked one evening, as she and Gabriel sat before the library fire, sharing the comfortable silence that had become their custom. "Apparently, she shows considerable promise with the pianoforte." Gabriel smiled, his expression softened by the firelight and something more, a contentment that had transformed his once stern countenance. "Perhaps musical talent runs in your family," he observed, his gaze warm upon her face, "though I doubt any could match your particular gift." Clara felt a blush warming her cheeks, still unaccustomed to receiving such straightforward appreciation. Throughout her childhood and youth, her accomplishments had been assessed only for their utility in securing advantageous connections. Gabriel's unqualified admiration remained a source of wondering joy. "The Royal Philharmonic performance is but 3 days hence," she reminded him, a flutter of nervous anticipation coloring her voice. "I can scarcely believe the moment approaches so rapidly." "Are you anxious?" he inquired, reaching across the space between their chairs to take her hand in his. The gesture, once unthinkable in their early days together, now felt as natural as breathing. "A little," she admitted. "Not for myself, but for your mother's legacy. I wish to ensure her musical voice receives the honor it deserves." Gabriel's thumb traced gentle patterns across her knuckles, a soothing rhythm that matched the crackling of the fire. "She would be proud, I think, not merely of the music, but of the woman who completed it with such understanding." Clara turned her hand within his, their fingers interlacing with practiced ease. "I wish I might have known her," she said softly. "From all you've shared, she seems to have been remarkable." "She was," Gabriel confirmed, his voice holding the mellow tone that emerged when he spoke of his mother. "Though in many ways you remind me of her, your quiet strength, your perception, your ability to see beyond surfaces to what lies beneath." The comparison, offered without calculation or flattery, touched Clara deeply. She had come to understand how profoundly Gabriel had loved his mother, how her loss had shaped the man he had become. That he could find echoes of Catherine Veilhart in his wife represented a compliment beyond measure. "I have been thinking," he continued after a moment's contemplation, "about Thornfield after the concert concludes. Parliament recesses in a fortnight, and spring has properly arrived in the countryside. You wish to return home?" Clara surmised, finding the prospect both appealing and bittersweet. Their time in London had witnessed the transformation of their marriage. Part of her feared that returning to Thornfield might somehow disrupt the delicate balance they had achieved. "I do," Gabriel confirmed, "but not immediately and not alone. I thought perhaps—" He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "That is, I wondered if you might consider a journey before our return." "A journey?" Clara echoed, curiosity replacing apprehension. "To where?" "To the Lake District," he replied, his gaze intent upon her face, as though gauging her reaction. "My mother spent her girlhood there, in a small cottage near Grasmere that has remained in our family these many years. It was her sanctuary, her place of rejuvenation. I have not visited since her passing, but lately I find myself thinking of it often." The invitation represented more than a simple journey. It was an offering of something deeply personal, a sharing of cherished memory and significant place. "I should like that very much," Clara said softly, "to see the landscapes that shaped her, that perhaps influenced the music we completed together." Gabriel's smile, still rare enough to send warmth cascading through her whenever it appeared, transformed his features. "Then it is settled. After the concert we shall journey north for a fortnight before returning to Thornfield." The evening of the Royal Philharmonic performance arrived with appropriate pageantry, the concert hall glittering with chandeliers and jewels as London's elite gathered for the cultural event. Clara and Gabriel arrived in formal splendor, she in a gown of silver-blue silk that complemented the strand of pearls at her throat, he in evening attire that emphasized his imposing height and aristocratic bearing. Their entrance caused a subtle ripple of interest among the assembled guests. Though they had made occasional appearances at diplomatic functions during their London sojourn, this marked their first formal debut as a couple in purely social circumstances. "Everyone is looking at us," Clara observed quietly as Gabriel escorted her to their reserved box. "At you," he corrected with gentle emphasis. "They look at you, as well they might. You outshine every duchess and countess present." The compliment brought color to her cheeks even as she demurred. "You are hardly an objective observer, sir." "On the contrary," he countered, his voice warm with sincerity. "My judgment has never been clearer." The program began with traditional fare. Mozart, Beethoven, selections that displayed the orchestra's technical prowess while satisfying conservative tastes. During the interval, Clara found herself approached by Lady Harrington, whose sharp gaze held unusual warmth. "My dear Duchess," the older woman greeted her, "you appear positively radiant this evening. London agrees with you. Or perhaps it is married life that brings such becoming color to your cheeks." Clara inclined her head in acknowledgement of the compliment. "You are too kind, Lady Harrington. How fares my sister? Her letters suggest she thrives under your guidance." "Isabel is a credit to your family," the matron confirmed with surprising enthusiasm. "Intelligent, quick to learn, and possessed of natural grace once removed from unsuitable influences." The delicate reference to the Condé's departure held no judgment, merely tactful acknowledgement. "I am grateful beyond words for your intervention on her behalf," Clara said sincerely. "You have given her opportunities I feared might be forever lost to her." Lady Harrington's shrewd gaze assessed Clara with evident approval. "It seems we have both witnessed remarkable transformations recently. Your sister blooms in Kent while you—" She glanced meaningfully toward Gabriel, who stood conversing with several parliamentarians nearby. "You appear to have accomplished what many considered impossible." "I am not certain I take your meaning," Clara replied, though a flutter of awareness suggested otherwise. "Come now, my dear. False modesty ill becomes a woman of your discernment." Lady Harrington lowered her voice conspiratorially. "You have melted the Duke of Thornfield's famous reserve, a feat that half the eligible women in London failed to achieve over 7 years of determined effort. One can practically see the thaw in progress." Before Clara could formulate a suitably diplomatic response to this observation, the bell chimed, announcing the interval's conclusion. Lady Harrington patted her arm with unexpected affection. "I look forward to hearing more about your sister's progress when next we meet. Perhaps you might call upon me before departing London." "I should be delighted," Clara assured her, recognizing the invitation as significant social currency. When they had returned to their box and the audience had settled once more, the conductor stepped forward to announce the program's final selection. Ladies and gentlemen, we conclude tonight's performance with a special presentation, the premiere of Hymn for the Unheard, composed by the late Lady Catherine Veilhart and completed by her daughter-in-law, the current Duchess of Thornfield. A murmur of interest rippled through the assembly as all eyes turned briefly toward their box. Clara felt Gabriel's hand close over hers, a silent gesture of support and shared anticipation. The first notes emerged from the orchestra like tentative whispers, Lady Catherine's delicate opening melody given voice by violins and gentle woodwinds. Clara closed her eyes momentarily, transported by the familiar yet transformed composition. What had been intimate and personal in her private playing now expanded into symphonic breadth. When the music reached the transition point, where Catherine's original composition ended and Clara's continuation began, she felt Gabriel's hand tighten almost imperceptibly upon hers. The melody deepened, gathering complexity and emotional resonance as her contribution unfolded through the orchestra. What had begun as whispered question evolved into assured statement, vulnerability opening into transcendent strength. Clara opened her eyes to find Gabriel watching her, rather than the orchestra, his expression holding such nakedly profound emotion that her breath caught in her throat. In that moment, surrounded by hundreds yet intimately connected, she understood with perfect clarity what had transpired between them, how a marriage of convenience had transformed into something neither could have anticipated nor planned. The hymn reached its conclusion not with dramatic flourish, but with gentle resolution, the final chord hanging in the air like a benediction before dissolving into silence. For a heartbeat, the audience remained motionless, held in the music's spell, then erupted into enthusiastic applause that seemed to shake the very foundations of the hall. The conductor gestured toward their box, inviting acknowledgement. Clara hesitated, unaccustomed to public attention, but Gabriel rose and extended his hand to her with quiet certainty. Together they stood as the applause continued, accepting the audience's approval with dignified gratitude. "They recognize what I have known from the beginning," Gabriel murmured, his voice meant for her ears alone, "that you possess remarkable gifts, of music, of understanding, of soul." Later, as they returned to Thornfield House through London's lamplit streets, a comfortable silence enveloped them. Not the awkward quiet of their early days together, but the peaceful communion of two people who had discovered the pleasure of shared understanding. "It was everything I could have hoped for," Clara reflected as their carriage approached the townhouse. "To hear your mother's music given proper voice, to feel her spirit honored in such a setting." "It was more," Gabriel replied, his gaze warm upon her face in the carriage's intimate shadows. "It was the culmination of a journey neither of us anticipated when we stood before the altar those months ago." Clara smiled, reaching across the space between them to touch his hand lightly. "A journey that continues, I think." "Indeed." He captured her fingers within his own, raising them to his lips with reverent tenderness. "And I find myself eager for each new milestone, each revelation it may bring." As they ascended the townhouse steps together, Clara felt a sense of profound rightness settle within her breast, not the resignation of duty fulfilled, but the quiet joy of having discovered, against all expectation, genuine love within a marriage begun in cold pragmatism. That night, as moonlight silvered their bedchamber with ethereal radiance, Gabriel held her close against his heart, his voice a whisper in the darkness. "I never thought to love again after Eleanor," he confessed. "I believed that capacity had died with her, leaving only duty and obligation in its wake. And now," Clara prompted gently, her hand resting upon his chest, where she could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her palm. "Now I understand that the heart is not so easily limited," he replied, "that what I feel for you diminishes nothing of what came before, yet stands entirely its own, unexpected, unplanned, and utterly transformative." Clara raised herself upon one elbow to gaze down at his beloved face, moonlight casting his features in silver and shadow. "From duty to devotion," she murmured. "Who would have thought such a journey possible?" His smile, visible even in the chamber's gentle darkness, warmed her more thoroughly than any fire. "The union began cold," he acknowledged, "but what it has become—" His voice trailed off, emotion rendering words inadequate. Clara lowered her lips to his, completing his thought with a kiss that spoke what language could not fully express, of barriers overcome, of souls recognized, of love discovered in the most unexpected of circumstances. Outside their window, spring rain began to fall, gentle droplets tapping against glass with rhythmic persistence, nature's own music accompanying the symphony that had developed between two hearts, once separated by duty and fear, now united in genuine, enduring love. Autumn painted Thornfield's grounds in amber and crimson, transforming the estate into a tapestry of seasonal splendor. Clara stood at the music room window, observing the gardeners collecting fallen leaves with methodical care, preparing the grounds for winter's inevitable approach. 6 months had passed since their return from London and the Lake District, each day deepening the connection that had blossomed so unexpectedly between herself and Gabriel. The cottage near Grasmere had worked a particular magic upon their relationship, its simple beauty and connection to Lady Catherine providing a sanctuary where they had discovered each other fully, without the constraints of social obligation or aristocratic performance. There, amid fells and lakes that had inspired poets and painters alike, they had completed their transformation from formal strangers to devoted partners. Returning to Thornfield had proven Clara's earlier fears unfounded. Rather than disrupting their newfound intimacy, the great house had embraced their altered relationship, becoming not a mausoleum of past grief, but a living testament to renewal and hope. "Always at the piano," observed a gentle voice behind her. Clara turned to find the Dowager Duchess watching her with fond amusement. Catherine would be pleased to see her sanctuary so well tended. "I was actually neglecting the instrument in favor of wool gathering," Clara admitted, gesturing toward the autumn landscape beyond the window. "The changing seasons invite contemplation." "Indeed they do." The Dowager settled herself upon a nearby settee, arranging her skirts with practiced elegance. Particularly when one carries new life within one's own being, Clara's hand moved instinctively to her abdomen, where the first subtle swelling had begun to make itself evident beneath her gown. "You are uncommonly perceptive, Your Grace. When one reaches my age, observation becomes both pastime and skill," the older woman replied with a knowing smile. "Besides which, you have that particular luminosity that accompanies impending motherhood. Gabriel must be beside himself with joy." "He is," Clara confirmed, warmth suffusing her at the memory of her husband's expression when she had shared the news 3 weeks prior. His customary reserve had dissolved into such naked vulnerability, such profound emotion, that she had found herself moved to tears alongside him. "We are planning a nursery in the East Wing," she continued, seating herself beside the Dowager, "though the child will not arrive until early spring. A fitting season for new beginnings," the Dowager observed. "And how fares the conservatory project?" "Gabriel mentioned ambitious plans when last he visited me at the Dower House." Clara smiled, thinking of the glass structure now rising behind the main house, a modern replacement for Catherine's modest original designed to house specimens from across the empire. "It progresses well, despite the architect's concerns regarding English weather. Gabriel is determined to create something that honors his mother's passion while embracing modern innovations. He has changed remarkably," the Dowager noted with evident satisfaction. "When you first arrived at Thornfield, I feared he had calcified entirely, grief and duty hardening him beyond redemption. Yet now he smiles. He plans for the future. He engages with life, rather than merely enduring it." "We have changed each other, I think," Clara reflected, her fingers absently tracing patterns on the velvet upholstery. "He has given me confidence and purpose. I hope I have offered him healing and renewal in return." The Dowager's shrewd gaze assessed her with approval. "More than you realize, my dear. But tell me of your sister. Her letters suggest significant progress in her studies." "Isabel thrives beyond expectation," Clara confirmed, gratitude coloring her tone. "Lady Harrington has arranged for her presentation next season, though in a quieter fashion than might otherwise have occurred. There is even mention of a young clergyman who has shown particular interest in her literary accomplishments." "Redemption comes in many forms," the Dowager observed philosophically. "Speaking of which, I understand Gabriel has implemented significant changes at the Tennant farms since your return from London." Clara nodded, pride warming her voice. "The improvements have already yielded results. The new cottages are nearly complete, and the school we established for the tenants' children has 27 pupils enrolled for the winter term." "And this foundation for governesses I hear mentioned in London circles?" the Dowager inquired. "Another of your initiatives, I presume?" "A joint endeavor," Clara corrected gently. "Gabriel provided the financial structure, while I merely identified the need. Too many educated women find themselves without resources or protection when circumstances change. The foundation provides training, placement, and if necessary, sanctuary." The Dowager's expression held unmistakable approval. "You have accomplished more of substance in 6 months than most duchesses manage in a lifetime of charitable patronage." Thornfield has been transformed under your stewardship, and not merely its physical aspects. Before Clara could formulate a suitably modest response to this praise, the music room door opened to admit Gabriel himself, his tall figure silhouetted against the corridor beyond. The smile that illuminated his features at the sight of his wife still sent Clara's heart fluttering like a debutante's, despite the months of intimate connection they had shared. "Aunt Margaret," he acknowledged the dowager with respectful warmth before turning his attention to Clara. "I hope I am not interrupting important confidences." "Merely female gossip and speculation," the dowager replied, with a twinkle in her eyes that belied her advanced age. "Though I should be returning to the dower house before evening falls, these old bones prefer not to travel in darkness." Gabriel crossed to kiss her cheek with unfeigned affection. "You know you are always welcome to stay at the main house, Aunt. Your rooms remain prepared for whenever you wish to avoid the journey." "And deny the young people their privacy?" "I think not," she retorted with spirit. "Besides which, I have grown accustomed to my own establishment, modest though it may be in comparison to this grand residence." When the dowager had departed in her well-sprung carriage, Gabriel joined Clara at the music room window, his arm settling comfortably around her waist in a gesture that had become habitual, yet never lost its significance. "You were missed this morning," he remarked, studying her profile with undisguised admiration. "The estate manager required signatures on the new leases, and I found myself wishing for your practical wisdom regarding the northern fields." "I overslept," Clara admitted, leaning slightly into his embrace. "The child seems to demand more rest than I am accustomed to requiring." His hand moved to cover hers where it rested upon her abdomen, the gesture protective without being possessive. "Then you must rest as needed, without concern for estate matters. Nothing is so urgent it cannot wait for your well-being." Clara turned within the circle of his arm to gaze up at his beloved face, no longer the cold, remote countenance that had greeted her upon their wedding day, but a visage transformed by happiness and purpose. "I was thinking this morning," she said softly, "of how differently everything might have unfolded had we not each found the courage to look beyond our initial arrangement." "Indeed," Gabriel acknowledged, his voice deepening with emotion. "I shudder to contemplate the joys I would have denied us both through my stubborn adherence to duty without connection." Clara raised her hand to touch his cheek gently. "We each carried wounds we believed defined us. You mourned Eleanor and your mother. I feared my father's cruelty and manipulation, yet somehow, in recognizing each other's scars, we found healing neither expected." "The scars remain," Gabriel observed thoughtfully, "yet they no longer limit us. They have become merely part of our shared history, not determinants of our future." From the open window came the scent of autumn, fallen leaves, distant wood smoke, the particular crispness that heralded seasonal transition. Clara breathed deeply, savoring the moment of perfect contentment. "I have been composing again," she admitted, gesturing toward the piano where sheets of manuscript paper rested upon the stand. "Not a hymn this time, but a lullaby for the child." Gabriel's eyes softened with wonder. "Will you play it for me?" Clara moved to the instrument, settling herself upon the bench with practiced ease. Her fingers found the keys without hesitation, drawing forth a melody both simple and profound. Notes that spoke of welcome, of protection, of love, freely offered without expectation of return. As the final chord resolved into peaceful silence, she felt Gabriel's presence behind her, his hands coming to rest lightly upon her shoulders. "Beautiful," he murmured, his voice husky with emotion, like its composer. Clara covered his hand with her own, their fingers intertwining with familiar intimacy. "I have been thinking," she said softly, "about what we might name the child. Should it be a daughter?" "And have you reached a conclusion?" he inquired, his thumb tracing gentle circles against her collarbone. "Catherine," she replied simply, "for your mother. Catherine Eleanor Veilhart." Gabriel's breath caught audibly, his fingers tightening momentarily upon her shoulders. "Who you would honor them both. They are part of who you are, part of what shaped the man I have come to love so deeply," Clara explained, turning to look up at him. "Their voices deserve to continue, not merely in music, but in flesh and blood." For a moment, Gabriel seemed beyond words, emotion rendering him uncharacteristically silent. Then he knelt beside the piano bench, taking her hands within his own with reverent tenderness. "When first we wed," he said quietly, "I believed our union would remain perpetually cold, a transaction of mutual benefit without genuine connection. How little I understood the transformative power of being truly seen and accepted, scars and all." Clara leaned forward to press her forehead against his, the gesture intimate beyond words. "We began as strangers, fulfilling duties," she murmured. "We continue as partners, sharing dreams." Outside the music room window, Autumn wind stirred fallen leaves into momentary spirals of amber and gold. Within, two souls once wounded by life's cruelties had found in each other not merely comfort, but profound joy. Proof that even the coldest beginning could, with patience and courage, blossom into love's most beautiful expression. In the distance, Thornfield's chapel bells chimed the hour, their resonant tones floating across the autumn landscape like a benediction. Clara closed her eyes, savoring the moment of perfect communion. Husband and wife, past and future, duty transformed into devotion, all contained within the peaceful sanctuary they had created together from what had once been merely a cold union of convenience. In the spaces between duty and desire, between scars and healing, lies the most profound truth of the human heart, that love is not merely found, but built, constructed patiently from the raw materials of vulnerability, understanding, and courage. The coldest unions can warm into the most fervent devotions not through grand gestures or passionate declarations, but through the quiet revolution of truly seeing another soul in all its wounded splendor and choosing day after day to remain. We are all in our way scarred beings, carrying invisible wounds that shape our fears, our dreams, our boundaries. Yet it is precisely in sharing these tender places, in allowing ourselves to be witnessed in our entirety, that we discover the possibility of healing. The Duke and Clara's journey reminds us that true intimacy begins not when we find perfection in another, but when we recognize and honor the broken places we each carry. Perhaps the greatest love is not the one that arrives fully formed like a thunderclap, but the one that grows softly, steadily, transforming duty into devotion through countless small moments of recognition and respect. For in choosing to see beyond surfaces, in daring to listen to what remains unheard in another's soul, we perform the quiet miracle of creating connection where once there was only obligation. If this tale of healing, redemption, and love touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe for more stories that explore the depths of human connection and transformation. What moment in the Duke and Clara's journey resonated most deeply with you? Was it when he first heard her continue his mother's hymn, when she found her voice against her father, or perhaps when they discovered that true intimacy begins with being truly seen? Share your reflections in the comments below. Each story touches us differently, speaking to our own unspoken wounds and hopes. Your perspective may illuminate something others have missed, creating a tapestry of understanding as rich and varied as life itself. Until our next journey together through words and emotion, may you find healing for your own invisible scars, and may you be blessed with those who see beyond them to the beautiful soul beneath. Thank you for being part of this journey.